Hey everybody, and welcome back to Submarine History. Today in briefing number 51, we're going to talk about the Walter U-boats, which included a series of design studies along with the construction of a handful of experimental U-boats utilizing air-independent propulsion systems. These design studies, along with the data obtained from operating the experimental U-boats, led to the design and production of the world's first production AIP-driven combat submarine, the Type 26 U-boat. Read the description to this briefing. It has relevant related references and links. I have a Discord as well, and there's an invitation link on the channel banner. If you like the briefing, you can leave a super thanks or consider a channel membership. Your donation helps offset the cost of purchasing books, professional memberships, and software needed to write and record the briefings you've come to enjoy and appreciate. Finally, thank you to the United States Naval Institute for all they do preserving and promoting world naval history. If you have any questions about the briefing, leave them in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. So, let's start the conversation today with the concept of air-independent propulsion. Air-independent propulsion, AIP, is any marine propulsion technology that allows a non-nuclear submarine to operate without access to atmospheric oxygen by surfacing or using a snorkel. AIP can augment or replace the diesel-electric propulsion system of non-nuclear vessels. The idea of being able to operate a submarine submerged and completely free from the need for atmospheric oxygen was elusive early on in the history of submarine development. In the 1860s, submarines were human-powered, making them very slow, with limited submergence time if you didn't want to run with your conning tower hatch open or with a snorkel. Because you only had a finite volume of oxygen in the boat, you tended to only submerge right before an attack, and most underwater endurance tests just involved the boat sitting on the bottom with minimal crew activity. Let's introduce another concept, the combustion triangle. What it shows us is that, for combustion to start and sustain itself, we need a fuel, oxygen, and heat. Narcís Monturiol, he is a Spanish engineer and inventor. He had built a submersible in 1859 called Isotino. It was a small human-powered submersible, basically a diving bell, that was used for harvesting coral. The boat made over 50 dives before being destroyed in an accident in 1862. To replace it, he launched Isotino II in 1865. At 14 meters in length and 46 tons, it was twice the size of Isotino I. Being twice the size of the original Isotino, it suffered more from the problems of being human-powered. Steam engine design had progressed enough at the time that it was possible to fit one into Isotino II. But how would that work? You could keep a steam boiler going while you were surfaced because you had access to the air, which is our oxygen source for that combustion triangle. Submerged, you'd run through all that available air inside the boat very quickly. And as a side note, from an aesthetic standpoint, I really like these boats. Monturiol knew that oxygen was generated when potassium chlorate and zinc reacted in the presence of a catalyst such as manganese dioxide. Not only did that reaction create oxygen, but it was also an exothermic reaction that generated enough heat to boil water. Monturiol obtained a 6-cylinder steam engine and retrofitted the Isotino II with it. He built a reaction chamber and modified the engine so that 3 cylinders could be powered from steam generated by a coal-fired boiler when on the surface, the other 3 cylinders being powered by steam generated from potassium chlorate being reduced in that reaction chamber. A side benefit was that some of the oxygen created could be used inside the boat by the crew. The retrofit was completed by October 1867. Monturiol operated the boat successfully through December of that year, until creditors repossessed it due to his financial insolvency. The creditors sold the boat to a businessman who ended up scrapping it rather than paying the required government tax. Other submarine developers experimented with compressed air as an oxygen source, but largely this area of study, air-independent propulsion, was abandoned or overlooked until the 1930s. In the early 1930s, Helmuth Walter was a German engineer working at the Germania Works shipyard in Kiel. He was working on the development of high-power gas turbine engines with marine applications. He also had an interest in submarine propulsion and would spend time thinking about how to improve submarine speed underwater. His thought was to develop a diesel engine that used oxygen stored on board a U-boat. and the source of the oxygen he intended to use was hydrogen peroxide. It's not entirely clear from the translated references, and I'm not a chemist, but I think the appeal was that oxygen required pressure tanks for storage, which meant extra weight and less space on board. Hydrogen peroxide is a liquid under atmospheric conditions, so you could avoid the pressure tanks, saving weight and room. Let's take a look at diesel engine combustion. Normally, we take diesel oil, fuel, mix it with air, oxygen, and we compress it in a cylinder which creates heat and results in combustion. That's our combustion triangle. Our combustion byproducts include nitrogen, carbon dioxide, water, oxygen, and a small number of other pollutants. Those combustion byproducts are normally expelled back out into the atmosphere. The left pie chart shows us the composition of air. Note that oxygen comprises 21% of air. The right pie chart shows the combustion byproducts from the diesel cycle. During combustion, we're consuming oxygen. It's going from 21% to 9%, and we're creating carbon dioxide that goes from 1% to 12%. Walter was thinking that underwater, you'd recirculate the diesel exhaust gases back to the engine, where you would scrub out the carbon dioxide, add oxygen, and then inject that mixture into the cylinders along with diesel fuel for combustion. That would be a reaction you could sustain as long as you had diesel fuel and oxygen on board. Normally, hydrogen peroxide decomposes slowly over time when exposed to atmosphere. But if we add a catalyst, we can speed up that reaction. In the case of hydrogen peroxide, the preferred catalyst was manganese dioxide, as it was for Monturial. This is the prototype design Walter came up with for his high-speed U-boat, and he did this in 1933. The hull has a parabolic bow, an elliptical stern, which is the classic shape for efficient underwater travel. And this is actually a throwback to Holland 6. Holland's idea was that submarines would operate mostly submerged in protected waters. Holland 6 could do about 6 knots surfaced or submerged. Over time, we end up with a surface ship profile, so submarines can travel fast on the surface and keep up with the fleet. With this profile, we can run on the surface at 17 to 22 knots. Unfortunately, this profile hurts underwater speed. In the 1930s, the typical maximum underwater speed was about 8 knots on an E-motor and batteries. You could only run at a maximum speed like this for about 60 to 90 minutes before the batteries were depleted. And that, of course, assumes you started with 100% battery power. This is really the problem that Walter was trying to solve. Let's come back to Walter's prototype design. Some dimensional information. 300 tons displacement surfaced, 320 tons submerged. Overall length 32 meters. 4 meter high with a 3.2 meter beam. Maximum surface speed 26 knots and 30 knots submerged. Range 2,000 nautical miles at 15 knots with 20% of that submerged. 500 nautical miles also at 15 knots. A couple other things about the prototype. There's no conning tower. That little hump on top is a shroud for a snorkel and a periscope. So this means we carry enough diesel for a 2,000 nautical mile range and enough hydrogen peroxide so that you can travel air independent for 500 of that 2,000 nautical mile total. After your hydrogen peroxide is consumed, you're forced to snorkel. Running on the surface really just meant the snorkel was raised. The rest of the boat stayed underwater the whole time. He stacked the diesels on top of each other in an offset fashion, and this was done to help keep the beam as narrow as possible. The crew and life support equipment would be contained in a special pressure hull inside the boat at normal pressure. In order to save weight, other compartments would have thinner steel and would be pressurized to resist sea forces. Dimensionally, this prototype was about the size of a Type 2 U-boat, and it had about the same range. But the Type 2 could only do 12 knots on the surface and 7 knots submerged. It could only do 35 to 56 nautical miles submerged at 4 knots. Remember, this is 1930 that Walter is thinking through these problems and figuring out this design. Germany wasn't at war where the battle environment quickly evolved and you had to counter increasingly dangerous technologies like ASDIC or radar or crawling depth charge attacks or aircraft and Fido. None of that stuff that Germany would be dealing with when the Type 21 U-boat program was started in June of 1943. Walter was anticipating what a U-boat would need to be 10 years in the future, even if he didn't know that at the time. How did Walter propose to make his closed-cycle diesel engine work? The box drawn around the engine room components represents the engine room. That would normally be sealed off from the rest of the boat. When snorkeling, you'd simply draw in air, that's our blue highlight, through the snorkel and send it to the diesel engine for combustion, and then the diesel exhaust, okay, that's the yellow highlight, would be discharged to atmosphere back through the snorkel. When you wanted to run completely submerged, hydrogen peroxide would be fed into a reaction chamber where it was reduced and released oxygen. That oxygen would then be mixed with recirculated engine exhaust and sent back to the diesel engine for combustion. Now, over time, carbon dioxide will build up in the exhaust, so it's continuously removed from the closed loop, and that's the red highlight. The CO2 is either sent through a CO2 scrubber to recover oxygen and send that back to the closed loop, or it's exhausted into the engine room itself. That CO2 could then be discharged under pressure into the sea. CO2 is absorbed by water, so you wouldn't be leaving a massive bubble trail. Walter planned to obtain a 250 horsepower diesel engine and secure a commercial source of hydrogen peroxide so he could test his ideas for the closed-cycle diesel engine. His source for hydrogen peroxide was from the electrochemical works in Munich, whom Walter would contact in March 1933. This was an unusual request to them, and it piqued the interest of the firm's founder, Albert Peach. Peach would become an advisor and investor to Walter when Walter left Germania Works in 1934 and started his own company to devote himself to the study and development of his AIP system and other ideas. In October 1933, Walter reached out to the Reichsmarine's chief naval construction advisor and pitched his design prototype. The Reichsmarine was interested in the project and gave Walter permission to refine it. Walter began testing his closed-cycle diesel engine. The test engine generated a lot of heat, which is why he had included an exhaust gas cooler in the recirculation loop. As he thought about it, he realized that he could just ditch the intercooler and use the hot exhaust gas to create steam and drive a turbine. He could get a lot more power out of the system that way. In March 1934, Walter presented to the Reichsmarine a revised prototype design with the diesel steam-driven AIP system. The Reichsmarine then offered Walter a contract on April 10, 1934, to develop a large test installation of the AIP system. Walter's revised prototype would become the Type 5 U-boat program. As Walter is working on the prototype, he realizes he can completely eliminate the diesel engine from his AIP system. Instead, what he comes up with is a turbine directly driven from the steam created by directly combusting fuel and oxygen. That's what's described in the picture, and Walter called this the direct process. We start with a fuel, yellow highlight, which is injected into a combustion chamber. That's the green box. At the same time, hydrogen peroxide is fed into a disintegrator where manganese dioxide reduces the manganese peroxide into water and oxygen. Okay, that's the red line. Those components are then injected into the combustion chamber where the fuel, oxygen, and water are mixed. The heat from the hydrogen peroxide reduction is used to combust the mixture, vaporizing the water to drive the turbine, and that's the blue loop. We cool the steam and recycle the water back to the combustion chamber. CO2 is continuously removed from the system and ejected from the boat under pressure. Walter proposed to improve the direct process by separating the combustion and steam loops, like a nuclear reactor, creating the indirect process. There were complications with this system. It generated enormous heat because water, which absorbed heat in the direct process, was removed from the combustion process in the indirect process. And they had a difficult time designing a suitable heat exchanger. Until the problem with the indirect process could be solved, the direct process would be used for Walter's prototypes. And sorry, I didn't highlight this one. I was going to have trouble drawing very tiny highlight lines on that picture. Anyways, with the signing of the Anglo-German Naval Agreement in 1935, the now Kriegsmarine goes to Walter and tells him they're going to cancel the Type 5 U-boat program in order to devote resources to the construction of traditional U-boats they can pump out right away. Karl Dönitz knew about Walter's work, and he helped him obtain a contract at the beginning of 1939 to build a single, small research boat with his direct process AIP system. This research boat was the V-80. This is the V-80. It's a single hull with 3 watertight compartments. From Section A, and that's the red box, we see it's a figure-8 hull with the lower compartment used to store the hydrogen peroxide. We'll see this again with the Type 21 electro boat. And this boat has no conning tower. 76 tons submerged, 22 meters long, and with a 2.1 meter beam. A crew of 4. 1 Walter drive rated for 2,000 horsepower. Max speed submerged, 28 knots. And this is a small research boat, so only 50 nautical miles at 28 knots. As a comparison, the Type 2D diesels had a total of 700 horsepower, and its E-motors a total of 410 horsepower. No torpedoes, as it's a research boat. She's built by Germania Works and launched April 19th, 1940. Walter and his team made over 100 test runs and operated the boat until the end of 1942 when it was taken out of service. The information collected from the research boat would be used to develop full-size Walter boats. And V-80 was scuttled in March 1945 near the Gulf of Danzig, and it's never been located. These following 3D images are from NTAS, which sells 3D printing files. The file pack for their model of the V-80 is about $30, and I have a link to their website in the description for this briefing. Okay, a couple more views. It's an aesthetically pleasing design. While the V-80 was conducting trials, Walter was already starting to design the next generation of boats powered by his AIP system. The U-boats Walter designed and got into the shipyards for construction were the Type 17, the Type 18, and Type 26 classes. The Type 17s were research boats broken down into 2 subclasses, the WA-201 and WK-202, and then the Type 17B and G. And that numbering had to do with which shipyards were building them. The Type 18 and Type 26 classes were full-size U-boats intended for action in the Atlantic. I'll talk more about these boats in a little more detail on the following slides. For now, I'm just trying to show you on one slide the different projects Walter was involved in. There was a parallel AIP system development program at that time led by the shipyard conglomerate Deschamag. Deschamag worked to develop a U-boat using a closed-cycle diesel power plant supplied by oxygen from pressure tanks. The hydrogen peroxide that was required for the Walter boats needed to be about an 80% concentration, and that was hard to come by, and at that concentration it was really unstable and dangerous to work with, so there was interest to see if pure oxygen could be a substitute. Walter's work was separate from what Deschamag was doing, and Deschamag wouldn't have known about the Walter boats. None of the boats Deschamag designed completed construction, so we're not going to take the time to review them today. The Type 17G and Type 18 classes both started construction, but they were canceled when the decision was made to build the Type 21, because that Germania Works shipyard space was needed. And on the right are the Walter boats that never made it past the design phase. These are the 7 Walter U-boats that were built and the dates that they were commissioned. Even though these boats did have torpedo tubes, they were still considered research boats. The WA-201 and WK-202 were also referred to as the Type 17A. All these Type 17 boats were built by Bloom & Voss and Germania Works. And this numbering scheme was used to keep straight who was building what. The WA-201 and WK-202 boats were similar, but they had some differences, as were the Type 17B and G, and this was likely due to the shipyards making changes to the designs as they saw fit. The WA-201 and WK-202 classes, single hull with 3 watertight compartments and no conning tower. These boats had a dual propulsion system, a traditional diesel-electric drivetrain for surface running and a Walter power plant for submerged. 2 torpedo tubes and a crew of 12. The WA boats were 309 tons submerged. They had a 2,900 nautical mile range thanks to the addition of the diesel. The submerged high-speed range was 127 nautical miles at 20 knots. The WK boats were 259 tons submerged with an 1,800 nautical mile range, and their high-speed range was 117 nautical miles at 20 knots. Because of the distances future production Walter boats would need to travel, there was a realization a traditional diesel-electric drive train and a streamlined ship profile was still needed to accommodate surface running. This would allow a U-boat to travel on the surface when possible, then switch to snorkeling when necessary. You could use an E-motor while submerged and save your Walter drive for when you needed that burst of speed. After the war, the U-792 and 793 were taken as war prizes by the British and were trialed before being scrapped. The Type 17B class, single hull with 3 watertight compartments and no conning tower. These boats also have a hybrid shape and a dual diesel-electric Walter propulsion system, 2 torpedo tubes and a crew of 19. The boats were 337 tons submerged. They had a 3,000 nautical mile range with a submerged high-speed range of 164 nautical miles at 15 knots or 123 nautical miles at 25 knots. And after the war, the U-1406 was taken by the USA and trialed before being scrapped. The U-1407 was taken by the British, who recommissioned it as HMS Meteorite. They used data collected from the operation of this boat as a design input for the Explorer-class submarine. 2 experimental British-built AIP boats using hydrogen peroxide. Design studies on the Type 17B suggested that a closed-cycle diesel power plant supplied with liquid oxygen could get you a submerged cruising range of about 1,080 nautical miles at 8 knots or 284 nautical miles at 17 knots. With hydrogen peroxide, you could get 1,160 nautical miles at 8 knots or 396 nautical miles at 17 knots. That high concentration of peroxide you needed, 80%, that was pretty hard to come by, and it was dangerous to work with, so pure oxygen was a compelling alternative. The Type 18, double hull with 8 watertight compartments. These boats also have a more traditional ship profile that's been streamlined, with more tapering of the beam at the bow and the stern. Diesel-electric Walter propulsion systems, 6 torpedo tubes with 23 torpedoes and a crew of 52. As designed, the submerged displacement was 1,652 tons. It was designed for a 7,000 nautical mile range, with a submerged high-speed range of 350 nautical miles at 16 knots or 202 nautical miles at 24 knots. Had this boat been built, it would have posed a real threat to the Allies, but the Walter drive needed more work, and it was faster to use the hull design and stuff it with a ton of batteries in the lower compartment instead of using hydrogen peroxide. And that's how we get the Type 21, by canceling the Type 18 program and repurposing its hull. With Germania Works dropping the Type 18, it was left to Bloom & Voss to build a full-size combat-capable Walter boat. That's what the Type 26 was. There were 3 design studies. There was the Type 26A, B, and W. The Type 26A and B were 950 and 1,050 tons surface, respectively. The Type 26W was smaller at 842 tons surfaced, and it was thought that version would be more suitable for attacking convoys. The Type 26W was 926 tons submerged, designed for a 7,300 nautical mile range with a submerged high-speed range of 158 nautical miles at 24 knots. Double hull with 4 watertight compartments and a bridge, but no conning tower. These boats also have a more traditional shape that's been streamlined and tapered, similar to the Type 18. Dual diesel-electric Walter propulsion systems, 10 torpedo tubes with 10 torpedoes and a crew of 33. The torpedo tube arrangement was interesting. It had 4 bow tubes and 6 aft-facing tubes located amidships that were set at an angle. And they did this because of the sealed propulsion compartment that took up most of the aft portion of the boat. These were externally loaded torps, so only 10 on board. Now, given the size, range, and armament of these boats, you'd classify the Type 26 as a coastal U-boat that was intended to fight convoys. These boats were going to be assembled from modules like the Type 21, and modules for 4 boats, that was the U-4501 through 4504, were under construction when the war ended. And by the way, you can play this boat, the U-4501, in World of Warships. After the war, Walter turned over to the Western Allies all his research and design documents concerning his AIP systems and boats. Albacore was the first U.S. boat designed with a teardrop hull shape, and you can see the similarities between it and the V-80. Same thing with the Skipjack class nuclear subs. They were the first nuke boats to adopt the teardrop hull. And then, of course, we have to compare the V80 to the modern German Type 212A AIP boat. Like with the Type 21, the Walter boats were innovative and would have posed a real threat to the Allies. But also like the Type 21, they wouldn't have been able to turn the tide of the war themselves. Submarines support the fleet. It's not the other way around. And when you don't have a fully functional fleet, like the Germans in World War II, your submarines can only do so much. At the time, hydrogen peroxide and pure oxygen weren't ideal fuels. Hydrogen peroxide at an 80% concentration was highly unstable, and it wasn't available in large quantities in Germany. As an example, one of the two Explorer-class submarines built by the British with a Walter drive was HMS Explorer, and its nickname by the crew was HMS Exploder. Pure oxygen was also dangerous to work with, and it required pressurized bottles, which added a lot of weight and took up a lot of room on a boat. Another consideration would have been sound dampening of the engine room. I'm not sure how much of noise a Walter turbine would generate. For sure, a closed-cycle diesel would be very noisy underwater. So that issue would have had to have been addressed. But it wouldn't be until the 1990s that AIP systems matured to the point of being a viable technology for submarines. As for Walter, he was actually known more for his work on rocket engines for airplanes, in particular the Me-163 Comet. After the war, he was relocated to the UK to help the British develop their own AIP boats using his technology. In 1950, he immigrated to the U.S., where he became a vice president at the Worthington Pump Company. He returned to Germany in 1956, founded a company that constructed a civilian submarine in 1967, using his turbine technology. And he passed in 1980 at the age of 80. Quite a remarkable man. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. Leave your questions and comments below. Come over to the Submarine History Discord and say hi. Till next time, peace out.